title is The Lean Way to Higher Quality, Faster Response, and Lower Cost. And specifically, we're going to talk about this idea of finding and eliminating waste. So, what is this lean way? It's basically a way of running a business. It's often referred to as lean management. And it's a way of running a business that really evolved and came out of the ideas of Toyota. So Toyota, right after World War II, was a tiny car company. And over a period of about 30 to 40 years, they went from that to pretty much dominating the global auto industry. It was just an amazing achievement. But what was really interesting is they came up with some unique ways of managing, unique ideas that ended up being communicated to other manufacturers. Has really changed how manufacturing is done in the world. And over the last 20 or 30 years has actually been transferred into other kinds of industries other than manufacturing. But it's been mostly large companies, corporations. And lean management is not really well known among small businesses. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is, consultants that get into lean and teach lean, they tend to go to the larger companies. That's where the money is, frankly. But also there's confusion. There's confusion about what lean really means. And if you have heard about lean, you might think, well, that's that Lean Six Sigma stuff. It's for big companies and it's very complicated and overkill. And that's not the case. It really isn't. And I'm here to tell you that lean is very scalable. And the basic ideas that you're going to be learning tonight, and actually over 3 more webinars that we've scheduled for next year, but you'll learn the basics tonight. Lean can work whether you have 10,000 employees, whether you have 10 employees, or actually if you are the sole employee or a sole practitioner. So, I've been where you are today, planning a business, starting a business. I know what it feels like. Basically, you have a million things you're thinking about. You're not sure about things. You're trying to decide how to run things. You start to get employees. How do you deal with employees? So these are things that, where do you learn that? Do you go read books? That may help and get some training. But really the best way is, I think, learning from people that have done it before. And that's why I really like SCORE, and I'm glad to be a part of it, because these are people that have done it, and you can learn so much from it. And I've actually been, now that I'm been associated with SCORE for a few months, I've actually attended some of the webinars, and it's really good stuff. So I really congratulate them, and I'm really proud to be a part of this. But what I'm going to be covering tonight are the kinds of things that I wish I had known when I first started. So I'm going to try to bring to you kind of the benefit of that, and give you some ideas that are not terribly complicated, but very powerful and very practical tools, techniques that you can really use and kind of take to the bank that really work. So let me give you a little idea of what lean management can do and how it works by kind of looking at some of the common complaints I hear from small business owners and managers. One very common is, and I kind of jumped past it here, there we go. Hey, I'm in a really competitive industry. Who isn't, right? Everything's about price. Customers are just so fickle. Where are all the loyal customers? And I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, business world is getting more and more competitive. So this is clearly an issue. So where are those loyal customers? Well, price is always important, yeah. But customers do have loyalty if they feel there's a company that really understands them, truly understands, gets them, and works hard to try to fill their needs. So the way lean helps is that it helps you as a business owner or manager to recognize and meet the needs of the customer without defects and with a minimal amount of waiting. Now, as you'll see, we'll get into this tonight, what we really mean by this. This is not, recognizing the needs of your customer. It's not about doing a survey and, oh, well, this is the type of thing that the customer wants. No, these are very practical, very specific techniques that let you understand better than than you do now, what really does your customer need at the level of an activity? And I'll talk about what that really means. But I can guarantee you, if you do the techniques that I'm going to cover tonight, you're going to learn things about your customer you don't know right now. And you'll do it without defect, no problems, and without waiting. Now, defects and waiting are two of the four fundamental wastes that we're going to talk about. So I'll get into that. Another common complaint, Murphy's Law, right? If something can go wrong, it's going to go wrong. Everything seems to be difficult. I struggle to keep costs down. It's hard to make a profit, right? I mean, who doesn't struggle with keeping costs down? If you're not having a problem with that, please send me an email. I'd like to know what you're doing. Maybe you're doing lean, but why does everything seem harder than it should be? And the reason is waste. You know, work can be smooth. Work can be done in a very efficient way, but turns out waste keeps us from happening. And again, waste is probably the most unique contribution that Toyota has made. And of course, we'll be covering more tonight. But understanding waste and eliminating it helps you to make the work easier, makes it less costly by identifying and eliminating the waste of effort and material. So those are the other two fundamental wastes. The last complaint that I hear often is, you know, some of my employees just don't want to follow instructions. They don't seem to be listening. And then when things go wrong, they make excuses. Why don't employees seem to care more about their job? Well, of course, you know, there's a number of different reasons why people do things, but it's what I've found is a very common reason why this happens is when employees feel helpless. They feel helpless to change things. They feel like they're kind of a cog in a wheel. So, you know, my boss doesn't care about me. Why should I care about them? So it can be you can easily become disengaged and disinterested in what you're doing. What happens with lean, when you follow lean management, your employees tend to care more because lean managers engage the mind of their employees, okay? And they give them a voice in making improvements. And it can be a little thing. It doesn't take much, but just having an idea of respect that can really make a big difference in how employees feel and care about their jobs. And the great thing about waste is it's very teachable. It's kind of the thing that managers can do to engage the mind of their employees and get them involved in making improvements. So that's kind of a high-level view of what lean can do. Here's actually on one slide what lean management is all about, especially from the standpoint of small business. So you can see at the top, you have two basic pillars, I call them pillars, of lean. And this is what lean management means. It means you get a little better every day. And it also means you want to build a team of engaged employees. Now, if you Google lean and read books about lean, oftentimes these two pillars are described. The first one is continuous improvement. And the second one is described as respect for people. But I find these are a little more action-oriented and really related to the things that you really need to do as a small business owner or manager. And there are four basic practices. That's what these four units are. You see along the bottom here. So if you want to follow lean management as a manager, you have to find and eliminate waste and get the whole team doing that. You have to get and stay organized. That includes, again, everyone. Getting everyone on the same page. Growing employees who love what they do. So you can see we're covering the first of the four practices tonight on finding and eliminating waste, and then we have scheduled future webinars for the other three practices. Now, again, all of these have very specific tools, techniques, very practical. Hopefully there's no fluff in here, or not a lot of fluff. These are things that you can really take to the bank and go use. The first three tonight, and then the February and March, mainly are going to give you ideas and tools and techniques for this getting a little better every day. How do you do that? You know, that's a concept, but how do you actually do it? And they also will help you in building a team of engaged employees. But this last practice in April is the one that really is directed towards that and building the kind of environment or culture, if you will, that, you know, grows the employees in a sense that really love what they do. And, you know, I'll give you a spoiler alert. It's basically about respect and trust and leading with trust rather than leading through fear. Anyway, we'll get into that a little bit tonight, more in the future. So before I get into finding and eliminating waste, though, I did want to kind of reflect a little bit on, you know, how do I know this works? Because that's important. And I've done, you know, a lot of study and work understanding what Toyota has done and how they've dominated the auto industry. I've talked about that. And then, of course, I've seen a lot of how lean management has really changed how many large corporations are run. But the two companies I want to mention specifically that have really hit me personally are Trend Distributors, which I was the owner, co-owner of, and president of, and then City Furniture, who was a great partner of ours. So let me just talk about that a little bit. So Trend Distributors was a wholesaler of cabinet and furniture hardware. My wife Brenda and I were the owners of Trend Distributors. Here we are down here. As you can see, it was a few years ago. I'm not going to say exactly how many, but here was a different color then. And so we carried about 5,000 different cabinet and furniture hardware items. We had knobs, pulls, drawer slides, hinges, sold them, even though we sold some to retail customers. It was mainly the cabinet shops, furniture makers, and so forth. And Brenda and I, with the help from our family, actually bought the assets of the business. It had gone out of business. It shut the doors for various reasons. We quickly came in, hired back a few employees, reopened the doors, and stabilized the business. And then tried to figure out how to run this thing and how to grow it. And after trying some different ways, we pretty much settled on what I'm now describing to you as this lean way. It turns out it has a lot of similarities to what Toyota and lean management do, and which means that at Trend, we were always trying to get a little better every day, and we respected our employees and got them involved, so we were all getting better every day. So that continuous improvement was not something that Brenda and I did to our employees. It was something we did with our employees. So what happened over 10 years, you can see this is our actual growth of sales. We grew to just about 10 million in sales after the 10th year. We did it with a great profitability performance. We actually ended up at about 30% return on assets in an industry where 5% was good. We had top service levels, 97, 98% fill rates for the 5,000 items in our catalog. We had top cash flow, collections. So basically between our cash flow and profitability performance, we were able to self-fund this growth, okay? We did have to borrow money the first year in order to buy the assets, but after that first year, we paid it off and we never had to borrow again. So it really was, we're very proud of what happened. And how did we do that? Okay. Well, I mean, you're seeing on the screen here how we did it. We had an incredible team of people. We had super family support. So you can see these are Brenda's parents. These are my parents. Both of whom had their own businesses and were, very helpful in our business. Our children were involved. They were on the young side, but they all got involved in one way or the other. But, we grew from about 5 to about 60 employees over the 10 years. And most of those were not family, but they seemed like family. So I really, in retrospect, have to give credit to, how did we get this team? How do we do this? And it was running the business the lean way. Again, respecting these people and getting them, working with them to get better every day. That's it. There were no major ideas, no incredible technology, nothing. It was just Sometimes I think of it as like basic blocking and tackling, just do it. So after 10 years, we actually got an offer we couldn't refuse from a large German company to buy the company, and so we sold it. To make a long story short, I went back to school, got a PhD, joined the faculty at Nova University, and taught in business school. But my real flagship course that I developed and taught as part of that was something called Lean Entrepreneurship. Because, you know, after studying Lean, after having experienced it at Trend, I was just so fascinated by it. And it was just, I've become very passionate about it because it's just such an amazing thing that I really am, continue to try to not only teach, but also coach, you know, businesses on how to do this. So in the process of teaching Lean at Nova, I was very fortunate to very early on become in contact with the folks at City Furniture. Now, City, you don't maybe think of them as a small business because they're not, but they're not a joint corporation either. They're a family business run by the Koenig family. Here you see this is Keith Koenig, who is chairman of the board and CEO, and then his son Andrew Koenig, who's now the president, worked his way up. And about 12 or 13 years ago, Andrew, on a lark, went to Japan to study Toyota. And he came back and he'd never seen a more amazing, seemingly perfect organization. And he convinced his father, Keith, that they really should try this. And they did it. And the rest is history. They are one of the best examples of how lean management has transformed a company. And they're just doing amazingly well. Every time I taught the class here, you can see one of my early classes. I would take it to their distribution center so the students could see lean, how it works, and they would actually, Keith and Andrew would participate in teaching the class. So I do want to thank them too for, you know, being such an inspiration and such a great example of lean right here in our backyard. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight then, learning objectives, kind of two things that I would like to see happen here. First is I want to try to help you learn how to get a little bit better every day by finding and eliminating waste. That's the way you do it. Okay, that's the tools and techniques. So what you will learn tonight is something that you should be able to take to the office or wherever you go tomorrow and start using it, start applying it right away. You can do it yourself at first. That's the way you should do it. And then if you do have employees, you can start to teach your employees. So it's very practical, very do it now kinds of things. But secondly, I would like you also at least to have an appreciation for this whole idea of lean management, because it really can be an awesome way to run a business. And hopefully you'll become interested in it and continue to learn about it, whether you come to some of my future webinars, whether you read about it and so forth. So those are the objectives I have for tonight. All right, so finding and eliminating waste. What is this about? Well, it starts with focusing on activities, the things you do in everyday work. So for example, if you have a restaurant, it would be the activities of cooking meals, serving the meals, greeting customers. That's the things you do all the time. If you're a mortgage broker, you're reviewing mortgage applications all the time. You're an accountant, you're always doing financial statements, tax returns, and so forth. So it's the things that you do regularly. It might not do them actually every day, literally, but you're doing them regularly. Okay. Now, when you look at your activities, you are recognize that actually every activity has a purpose. You're doing it for some reason. And what you're really doing is you're trying to deliver value to the customer of that activity. So for example, in a restaurant, cooking, serving meals, that's the activity you look at. Who is the customer of that? It's your patron, the person that comes and pays for the meal, right? That's the purpose of it. And you're trying to deliver value to that person. If you're an accountant, your client, you're preparing a financial statement. Why are you doing that? Because you want to deliver value to the client who needs that financial statement. So with that said, then, waste, as you can see here, is any activity that does not produce value for the customer of the activity. Okay. So, and again, this is the unique contribution of Toyota that really is so simple and yet so powerful. So anything that's not producing value for the customer of the work, you want to try to get rid of it. You want to try to eliminate it. And you experiment with changes to eliminate the waste. So it's a trial and error kind of process. As you eliminate waste or sometimes add value, which we'll have an example of that, you're going to adopt those positive changes and keep going. You know, it's continual. The doing of the work combines and is actually also the improving of the work. So if you think about it, it's very powerful that, you know, when you focus more and more of what you do on what the customer needs, you're going to do better in a lot of ways. Your quality will go up because you're more focused on them. As I said, you'll also learn some ways of understanding better what the customer needs. Your responsiveness will improve. You'll do it. There'll be less waiting and there'll be lower cost. Okay, so let's look more closely at what are these wastes. We're going to go through examples of these in a little bit. You have defects, waiting, effort, and materials. Now, if you Google lean, you'll see typically 7 wastes, sometimes even 8 wastes. But really, for purposes of, you know, teaching employees and the basics of running a small business, these 4 work really well. I mean, I've taught this stuff for 10 years now, and, you know, seen what works and doesn't. This is really a very effective way to understand waste. So let's look at them quickly, and then we'll go into more detail. Defects, errors, mistakes, or problems with a product or service. So basically, that's when things go wrong, something went wrong. Waiting longer than needed to serve the customer. So you might not have any defects, maybe it was a beautiful service, but the customer had to wait longer than they would like. Maybe there was too much effort. You were exerting more effort than is necessary. And we'll see examples of what that really means. And then materials. Materials, whether you acquire, hold, or use more material than you really needed to serve that customer. Now, as I said, this was the unique contribution from Toyota that I really feel is a genius idea. It's very simple. It's very teachable. People can learn how to recognize signals of waste, which you're going to go into examples here shortly. But it's also universal. I mean, these really apply to literally any kind of everyday activity that you perform, regardless of the kinds of business that you're doing. The thing with waste is it can be difficult to see. Often it's kind of hiding in plain sight. You don't realize it's there. I'll give you an example. You know, let's talk about waiting. You go to the doctor's office, check in, you sit down, wait for them to call you. You wait 15, 20 minutes, they call you, you go in. Is that waste or is that normal? A lot of people would feel that's pretty good, that's normal. But just because it's normal doesn't mean it's not waste. It is waste. Why is it 20 minutes? Could it be 10 minutes? Wouldn't that be better? How about 5? You know, I've actually got my dermatologist is unbelievable. So I go fairly often, you know, just kind of do lookovers. And I literally, if I wait more than a minute, I'm surprised. So, you know, you can do it. It's doable. So the reason you have, because waste tends to be all around you, you just don't realize it. You know, defining these 4 types helps you to recognize it. It's almost like a lens, like a pair of glasses you're putting on so you can recognize the waste, because finding it and recognizing it as something that needs to be addressed is actually more than half the battle. Okay, now these are the 3 steps you go through to find and eliminate waste. And don't worry about these. It seems like a bunch of bullets. It's actually pretty simple. I like to view this as kind of learning to dance, right? You know, when you first start to learn to dance, you learn the steps and kind of have to walk through it a little clumsy at first, but you practice it, you get used to it, and eventually it just comes naturally. You don't have to think about the steps anymore. And that's the case here. This is really to get you started, to get you to learn it. And then, over time, as you practice this, it'll become what you do. So real briefly, the first step is to find the waste, which we can find either by seeing waste signals, which I'm going to show you what those are, or through what I call a eureka moment, where you just suddenly realize there's a better way to do something. You do speculate on the reasons for the waste. It's not always obvious what the reasons are, but it's important to think about them, because that's going to take you to the next step where you're going to try to eliminate it. You need to understand, where it's coming from or where it might be coming from. So in step 2, where you're trying to eliminate it, you want to identify a metric and set up a baseline. I'll talk about that. You don't have to do it, but it's really useful to do. I'll talk about that in one of the examples. But you experiment. This is trial and error. You experiment with a change. Let's see if this works. Sometimes you may need prior approval to do it, because you might be affecting what other people are doing, and you have to kind of coordinate with them. But you try it. And then step 3 is see how you did. Did it change? Did the change you make improve the metric? Did you reduce waste? Was there other good or bad consequences? And if it was an improvement, you accept it. It might be a little thing. That's how it is. Again, getting a little better every day. If it was an improvement, then try something else. More than likely, though, you learned. So trial and error and failure is, that's an opportunity to learn. But you want to do it in a way that these are small failures. These are not major changes that you try to make with this. So we'll go through examples of these. This is a worksheet that just takes those steps and kind of puts it in a worksheet form. You should have received this worksheet and this previous 3 steps chart as PDFs a couple of days ago, I guess. This one, actually, the way the worksheet you received as a PDF if you want to print it out, or in a Word document where you can go in and just actually fill in narrative in these little boxes if you prefer doing that. But if you did print these out, I may have them in front of you, because we're going to be using these as examples, and you may want to make notes on it, things like that. Okay, so let's get into it. So we're going to first look at the waste to defects. Again, definition: errors, mistakes, problems with a product or service. Basically, something has gone wrong. Now, very important, here are the signals. This is what you look for to say, okay, there's waste here. There's something we need to deal with. Reworking an activity because there was a problem. Whenever you have to do something again, that's a sign there was a defect. Why'd you have to do it again? Because there was a problem. Customer didn't get what was promised. Okay, defect. We didn't deliver what the customer expected. Sometimes you see both of these, sometimes you see only one. If the customer didn't get what was promised, but you didn't realize it till later, maybe you didn't redo whatever it is was a problem, but you may never see that customer again. So anyway, these are the signals you look for. Examples would be steak overcooked in a restaurant. Okay, clearly a defect. Email sent to the wrong person. Okay, whoever, again, the person that was the customer of that activity was supposed to get that email didn't get it. Okay, you may have had to resend it again if you found out. Missing information in an application form. Okay, whoever was supposed to get that application form, that was the customer of that activity, and they didn't get it. They didn't get what they needed. So I'm going to take the steak overcooked at a restaurant. We'll walk through that worksheet so you get a feel for how this actually works. So, overcooked steak. What's the activity? Remember, it's all about activity at work. So think about it. What is it? Well, the activity is preparing and serving a steak dinner. Who's the customer of that activity? It's the restaurant patron. That's why you're doing it. That's the purpose of the activity. What does the activity customer need? Well, they want a steak that's hot and sizzling. They want it to look the way they want it. They want the color and texture, exterior, to be as desired. They want the interior color, the pinkness, the taste, of course. prompt and friendly service. So for this to be overcooked, then most likely we're not, maybe the exterior, it didn't look right. Maybe they cut into it, it didn't taste right. So let's see how that was dealt with. So we'll walk through the worksheet. So you can see here, just you jot down the activity, preparing and serving steak. The customer is the restaurant patron. So we'll walk through step one, where just find the waste, right? So this is the observed waste signal or that eureka moment. In this case, we observed a couple of waste signals. There were frequent complaints received from patrons that their steaks are overcooked. Okay, customer not getting what they're promised. And there was rework. So because we had to recook and serve replacement steaks, cook them, serve them. Now here you identify what is the main waste type. And here, based on these signals, it's clearly defects. What are the possible reasons? So remember, that's part of step one, is to kind of speculate. And we're not really sure. We know it's happening, but is there a problem with the oven? Is the temperature control off? Cooking procedures? Maybe we're not cooking it right. Maybe the menu's misleading. Maybe we're describing the steak in the wrong way, in a way that's confusing to the customer. What is pink? What is, medium rare? What do you expect? There may be other reasons. So that's step one. Step two, now we're going to try to eliminate the waste. But remember I said you want to, if you can, first come up with a metric. And the metric should be driven by whatever the waste is. So if the waste is defects, that's what you want to measure, because that's the thing you're trying to reduce or eliminate. So in this case, it was the number of overcooked steaks. So they actually prepared a little worksheet, and the shift managers recorded incidents of overcooked steaks, the date and what happened when on the worksheet. It was a temporary worksheet. It wasn't something they were going to do forever. And the baseline was they looked at that for a couple of weeks, and they were running about 10 overcooked steaks per week. So what was the experiment? So now you come up with an experiment. And what they tried was, let's try adjusting the cooking time to reflect steak thickness. They thought that might have been an issue. And the senior chef actually provided some guidance on how to do that, how to measure the steak thickness, what kind of cooking times are needed for the different, medium, rare, medium, and so forth. And then step three, having done that for a couple of weeks, what happened? Well, that's where you look at the metric and you say, wow, we reduced this to 3 overcooked steaks a week. What else happened? Other impacts. The servers were very happy about it. They liked the improvement because there were fewer blow-ups with customers. Customers don't like overcooked steaks. And they protected their tips better. They didn't get nailed as often with low tips. So what do you do? Did you adopt the change? Sure. It's working. Let's do it. Train the chefs to make sure everybody's on board with it. But what's the next step? Well, we're going to continue investigating because there's still 3 overcooked steaks a week. Why is that? Okay, so what you're really doing here is, with this finding and eliminating waste, is small experiments. These are not grand studies and projects. And you go through a cycle. You kind of imagine a better way of doing something. You try it out if you can, or you might what if it. Now, what if it means that you kind of do a thought experiment. You say, what if I were to do this? What would happen? And you can kind of think it through and then evaluate that and maybe ask other people about it. Or you may actually try something and evaluate it and say, well, okay, I've learned something, but it's not exactly what I wanted. Let me try something else. So you might have to go through this cycle a few times. But this is not to spend days and weeks studying it and analyzing it. The philosophy of lean improvement is just do it. Okay, just do it. The best way to do it is engage others in brainstorming and trying and evaluating. Okay. So as I said before, and we'll go over it a little bit more later on, that this is something you want to learn to do yourself, but you really want to start getting other people involved in it, which your employees, or it could be, partners or your bankers or whatever. But as you do that, it's very important. you and whoever is involved in going through this brainstorming and learning by trying, you have to have the ground rule: blame the process, not the person. Okay, blame the process, not the person. Why is that important? Because waste is all about problems, right? Defects and waiting and too much effort and all this. If you want to get your employees involved in that, they've got to feel comfortable talking about problems. If they're worried about getting blamed for something, or if they're worried about embarrassing their buddy who did something, you're really not going to get their participation. So part of making this work is to, have that ground rule. As you start explicitly talking about waste and a problem comes up, you say, okay, how could we improve this process? Not, Fred's screwing up again. Okay, Now, Fred may be messing up, but you don't shame him in public. You would then maybe take him off to the side, and even there, you're not going to say, Fred, why are you so dumb? You say, Fred, how did this happen? What can you do to improve this? What can I do to help you improve it? And over time, Fred might have to be terminated, but that's the approach you take. Is you're looking for people that are willing to try and willing to try to improve. And you definitely cannot be in the blame and shame game and make this work. Okay, so that's defects. Let's look at waiting. Definition of waiting longer than needed to serve the customer. What are the common signals? Well, if your customer is upset with delays, that's pretty straightforward. But it might be your customers are merely waiting in line. They're not complaining. They're sitting in that doctor's office. But if they're in line, they're waiting. That's waste. If they're holding on the phone for you, that's waiting. If they're sitting in a car trying to find a parking spot, that's waiting. So those are all signals of waiting waste. And of course, it could be employees who waiting to do something until somebody else finishes their work. Okay, that's a form of waiting. Examples would be, say, a customer waiting to be seated in a restaurant. A builder may be waiting for the city to issue them a permit. Seems like a pretty common thing to happen. Patient waits for weeks to get in a doctor's appointment. So let's look at an example. Now, the example we're going to look at is MSP handling support tickets. Now, an MSP is a managed service provider. These are companies that act as often the IT department for small and even mid-sized companies. Some of you may work with an MSP. And what they do, so the activity that we looked at was handling a support ticket. So when the client company has a problem, my computer's not working, they send a support ticket to the MSP, the consultant, and they will then respond and fix it. So the activity we looked at was how to handle those support tickets by the MSP, and the customer is the client. They're the ones trying to get the computer fixed, right? What did the customer need from this activity? They wanted their request acknowledged. So when they sent it in, they wanted to say, oh, yeah, I got it. I'm working on it. They wanted promptly satisfied or fixed and verified. They didn't want hassles, and they didn't want loss of data. Now, when we first looked at this, actually, the MSP was not acknowledging requests. Okay, they get a request in, a ticket came in, they'd start working on it. But by actually trying to practice lean management, the MSP folks then went and talked to customers and looked more closely at the activity, right? I was saying, as you look at the activity, you learn more about the customer. And they realized, customers were saying, it'd be nice if you could acknowledge, because I send you an email, I don't know if you're working on it or not. What if the email got lost? It usually didn't. So they said, oh, get it, So they added an acknowledgement as the regular standard practice, and that was a defect because they weren't getting what they really wanted, and it was fixed. But you can see how by looking at that activity, you were able to kind of pull that out, learn about that. If you looked at other activities in the same situation, if you look at when the MSP is setting up a new computer server, okay, there's going to be different kinds of needs associated with that. So each activity is going to have certain needs. And so, as I said earlier, it's not like just doing a survey and say, what do you want? You know, what kind of service do you want from us? Each activity, you look at it at that level, and you really learn so much from doing that. It's not easy. Okay, you're gonna, when you first look at it, you may be a little flummoxed. You have to be a bit of a detective, and that involves observing. Okay, part of this is really observing what actually happens, going out and talking to customers and ask them specifically, what would make this a great process? Or sometimes you can say, what could go wrong? What are the things that go wrong with this process? Has anything ever been a problem for you? And it'll jog their memory. So anyway, that's on the front end of understanding what that customer really needs to a level you probably don't know now. So let's see what happened. So again, activity, handling a support ticket, the MSP's business client. So in this case, we were observing waste. We were starting to hear complaints from clients that the service was getting slower. And so that's a signal that we saw, complaints about delays. And clearly that's a waiting waste. What are the reasons? We're not really sure. We did hire a couple of support techs recently. Did they need more training? Was there an unusually large number of complex tickets that take more time? Did the volume go up recently? We don't really know. So step two, though, but we did speculate on it. Step two is to try to eliminate the waste, come up with the metric. Now, again, the metric should relate to the waste you're trying to get rid of. So waiting is the waste. Response time, that's what we're looking at, but you have to define it. It's the time between when the ticket is received and when it's resolved. Our standard response time for that was 60 minutes. And in looking at response times, we actually were running about 80 minutes. So you can see, things are slower than we'd like. So we tried an experiment. What did we do? We tried to reinforce the basic training of the two new support techs. So the senior tech, for 2 weeks, spent an hour per week with each new tech trying to go over the training, what they needed to do. And as a result of that, we looked at the metric, and it improved a little bit. It went from 80 down to 75 minutes, but still is not where we want it. And we found that the new support techs appreciated the additional training, but they were saying they're uncertain about when to escalate a ticket. And that's when the problem is more difficult than the support tech can handle, and they've got to send it to a more senior person. And so what did we do? We did not adopt any change there because it really didn't seem to help much. But we did learn that this escalation is a problem. And so we continued observing, documenting reasons for escalation, and we tried to come up with better training to help them to understand when they could escalate. And that ended up working. Okay, we ended up getting that response time down and permanently made that part of what they do, is instructions for how to escalate. So I did want to point to the metric here because you might say, oh, this seems like a lot of work. Why do I want to do all that? But it's really important. I mean, you don't have to do it, but it's really going to help you, and I'll show you why. So here's the example. And even though they were able to pull a report the next day that showed these times, they actually created the worksheet as the tech. Here's the first ticket came in at 9:05 in the morning. It was resolved by 9:37, so that was 32 minutes. Okay, good. Compared to 60, that's good. 9:12 to 10:31, 79 minutes. These got escalated, so that was a different category. So as you do this, there's two reasons to do this. One is that it lets you know if the change you're making is working or not. Okay, and it's a lot better than just kind of eyeballing it. I mean, to actually see the numbers really brings home whether you're making an improvement and reducing the waste that you thought you wanted to reduce. But the other thing, which is really kind of a hidden benefit of this, is when you're actually doing it by hand, Typically, it's the person close to the work, so maybe actually the tech who's doing it. As you're doing it, you're seeing the numbers, and you're in your back of your mind, you're going, well, I'm trying to hit 60 minutes, we're doing good. And I get here to like the one that came in this morning, and I finished it this afternoon, 112 minutes. I go, yeah, that's double the normal. What happened there? And maybe I'll go, oh shoot, I took lunch. So maybe I'll make a note, took lunch. Maybe I should have handed it off to somebody, or maybe some other reason. So when you do this, what you find is as you're filling in the numbers, you're seeing what's happening, and you can right then look at it. Right then see what happened. If you were to come in tomorrow and look at these numbers and say, oh, we had 112 minutes, what happened? You'd have to reconstruct it. A lot of things happen in the meantime. If you can kind of be aware as you're doing it, you're going to really learn more. So if you can do these metrics, it's worth it. Okay, let's do now effort, and we'll do materials. These are the two that really tend to drive costs. Definition of effort waste: exerting more effort than needed to serve the customer. Common signals: people walking around a lot, especially back and forth. Okay, like in a restaurant, if the wait staff clearly has to walk around, but do they seem to be kind of going back and forth, back and forth? Seems like there's too much effort or too many steps. Not just physical steps, but process steps, kind of. Which is, it's not a formula. It's intuitive, where you say it seems like too much, but you want to trust your intuition. If you think it's too much, it's probably too much. Work activities that result in fatigue or injury, maybe hand, carpal tunnel, shoulder, back injuries. Those are indications of too much effort being involved. Examples, like when there's excessive steps to approve a building permit. Maybe multiple screens needed to answer a customer's question. How much clicking do you have to do? You often hear that on the other end of the line, right? You're talking to AT&T and they're click, 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 click. So, that may be too much effort. Hunting around to find something in a messy file cabinet, right? So, or message storage room. So those are examples of the waste of effort. Waste of materials. Here you're talking about acquiring, holding, or using more material than needed to serve the customer. So acquiring might mean purchasing it, or if you're a manufacturer, it would be making it, but most of the time we're talking about purchasing. Holding it in inventory, and then actually using it. What are the common signals? Well, if your storage areas where you're keeping the materials are overcrowded, that may be an indication. Materials being discarded, if you're having to throw them out for various reasons, that's a definite indication of a waste of materials. Dust on the storage boxes, okay? That just means it's been sitting there a long time, which is waste. You're holding it too long. Examples, a restaurant, some of them, you pre-make salads in the morning and you make more than are needed for the day. You got to get rid of them at the end of the day. Clothing store holds on to too many out-of-fashion dresses in stock. Instead of, we hate to get rid of them, maybe somebody will buy it. A law firm orders too many office supplies. Now, the materials, that, of course, is more important if you're in a material or product-based business like manufacturing or like wholesale retail, where inventory is a big deal. Restaurants, that's also true. Inventory is a big deal in restaurants. Oops, sorry. So is inventory a waste? Yes, it's a waste. Should we carry zero inventory? No, probably not. And there's a whole science to determining what is the right amount of inventory. But the reason at this point is to look at it as a waste is we tend to be biased to carrying too much inventory. It seems like it's an asset. How can that be a waste? We're just going to have, just in case inventory. And that's something that you need to be aware of, that you may be carrying too much. Now, the example that I use here to talk about waste of effort and materials comes out of City Furniture. And what happens at City is, you can see a picture here of part of their warehouse, is they bring in furniture from all over the world. They have their own manufacturing plant up in Mississippi, but it typically comes in some form of packaging. A lot of it's in cardboard. And if there's a problem with it, say a little nick or a scratch or something that can be pretty easily fixed, they'll take it out of the packaging. And they actually have a furniture refinishing shop where they will, put it back to new condition, put it back in the packaging, and then have it ready for the driver. They have their own driver, own fleet driver and trucks. You've probably seen their trucks running around for delivery to the retail customer in the home. So we're looking at this repackaging. So they pull it out of the package, they put it back in, but sometimes the original cardboard is messed up. They have to have extra cardboard to put it together. And from the needs of the retail customer for this activity, all they really care about, their furniture is in good condition. They don't care if it's cardboard or whatever it is. As long as the furniture is okay, they're fine. A lot of times they don't even see it. The furniture is pulled out of the packaging out on the truck on the street before they even bring it in. So let's see what happened here. Warehouse worker was observing this. This is all true story. Seeing this cumbersome packaging, repackaging, waste of, they're seeing the cardboard. You have to buy extra cardboard at times. And they just had this kind of eureka moment of, wait a minute, why aren't we using moving blankets? The customer doesn't, I don't think they care as long as they get in good condition. And so this was really, in retrospect, a waste of effort, all this packaging and unpackaging and materials, because we were having to buy extra cardboard. Possible reasons, this one was simple. It's like, we never thought of this before. It's how we've always done it. So that's often the case with the eureka moment. It's like I consider it like a no-brainer. It's like, why didn't we think of that? And that's what happened here. So, but you still have to continue and play it out, because you want to make sure you're doing it right and not messing something else up. So step 2, you try to eliminate it. What are the metrics? Well, again, driven by effort and materials. The effort was how many labor hours we were putting in per week for all the repackaging and unpackaging. Materials were the weekly cost of the new cardboard material we have available. Baselines were established. I actually don't have all the details on exactly how they did that. But the experiment they did for 3 weeks, they tried using moving blankets instead of repackaging and cardboard. They did have to get the packaging folks involved, as well as the delivery drivers, because they're all part of the kind of the chain of action that this affected. And having done it, labor hours were reduced, cardboard costs reduced, and no negative comments from customers or the employees. So change adopted the change, updated the standard work document. Standard work is something that we'll cover in a future webinar. And they recognized and rewarded the warehouse worker who made that suggestion. So at Citi, like at any firm that really does lean management correctly, they expect their employees to be thinking. They hire them to think, and they expect them to come up with identify problems and suggestions for improvement. And they're required to do that. That's not an option. It's not a nice thing to do. It is what you do. Your job is to do your job and improve your job or suggestions for other jobs. But think about how that worker felt. Okay, every time that worker saw the moving blanket go by, with repackaged furniture, had to be super proud, right? I mean, say, hey, that was my idea. I've always said in my classes and from work experience, there's 3 ways you can get employees to accept change and be willing to go with it and not fight it. The first way is to get them involved early and communicate with them so you don't surprise them, and that's good. And the second way is to also sell them on an idea like, well, we're going to make this change. This is a good way to do it. Here's why it'll work good for you and for the organization. Okay, that's even better. The absolute best way to get them to accept change is when it's their idea, like in this case. Now, it can't always be their idea, but I would say I think you may be surprised at how often employees come up with really great ideas. That's been my experience. So Anyway, that was experience at City Furniture. And I do want to talk a little bit about this kind of internal customer versus external customer. So in this case, the activity of repackaging the furniture, actually, in some ways, you might argue the main activity of that customer is not the end retail customer. It's really the delivery driver, because it's the driver who loads that stuff on their truck and has to unload it, take it into the house of the customer and so forth. So, and actually in this case, the delivery drivers were an important part of the solution, because while they agreed the moving blanket worked fine, they said, well, we still need to protect corners. They wanted to have some corner protectors. So, they were part of it. But when you look for waste, find and eliminate waste, it works the same, whether you're talking about an outside activity or an inside activity. So, like I mentioned, processing weekly payroll. Okay, why are you doing that? What's the purpose? To create paychecks for employees. Okay, so it's the employee who is the customer of that activity. And you might say, well, how does that? Well, that doesn't really help my customer, right? My outside customer. But if you think about it, if you do these things well, let's say you're not doing it well, and your paychecks are inconsistent and late and mistakes, you're distracting the employee, and that's not going to be good for how they're serving the customer. So if you do a good job internally, not only do you typically save on cost, you're more efficient, but it also works its way through to the end customer. The other thing about this is that when employees start thinking of each other as customers for certain activities, think about how that really builds teamwork. Okay, it really builds positive relationships, where instead of being adversarial, which it can be, it'd be more, hey, we're each other's customer. So this compares with external activities, which we've talked about, where the activity you're looking at is directly serving a restaurant patron, like handling the support ticket, the MSP. You might be running a spa salon, spa client. This webinar is presenting a webinar as an activity, and the main activity customer are you guys. So I actually, as I prepare this and try to come up with the best possible way, I think very carefully about what it is you want, not what I want to talk about. It's what I feel is going to deliver value for you. And I'm always improving it. I'm sure I drove Karina and Rosario nuts with changes up until last night, but that's it. That's the continuous, get better, get better, get better. So anyway, so that's it. That's finding and eliminating waste. Hopefully it makes sense to you. We'll get into questions and answers in just a minute, but I want to kind of wrap up a little bit here. So to follow up, what I would suggest is you do these things, go out tomorrow morning and try to find some waste. Just a little bit, take a look, observe some activities, look for some waste signals. Think about who's the customer of the activity, what do they want? Then pull out your worksheet. Go ahead and try to eliminate the waste. Experiment with some ways of eliminating it. It might be something you can do quickly, or maybe it'll take a little bit of time. And when you do make a positive change, accept it and celebrate it. Like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then try to make that a habit. Keep looking for and eliminating waste. Post the BOLO chart. BOLO is be on the lookout for, which is this chart here that you were, I think was sent to you. It's basically everything you saw here in the webinar, but in a single chart you can put on the wall. Walls are incredible resources. That's part of another webinar coming up. And so again, make it something that you do, lead by example. If you have employees, start to teach them. But remember that what I told you about blaming the process, not the person. Very, very important. So you really got hopefully a good start on this. You've learned this first practice of what it means to find and eliminate waste. And that's how you get a little better every day. And you've begun to learn about building the team of engaged employees by getting them involved in this. But then these other 3 webinars will cover the other 3 main practices of lean management, where you will learn more and more tools and techniques for getting better every day, and learn other tools and techniques for actually building engaged employees through creating a respectful and trusting environment. And you see the dates. These are the dates scheduled for the future webinars. If you don't want to wait, you want to get into it earlier, I do. Karina mentioned it earlier. There's what I call a lean management playbook available. If you go to my website, which is essenceoflean.com, you will see the link to YouTube. It takes about 2.5 hours if you want to listen to the whole playbook. It's a compilation of lessons from an executive education class that I did on Zoom earlier this year. And it covers all the 4 practices. It's in a little bit different order, but it gives you, detail on all of that. If you want to go even further, you can get my book, The Essence of Lean, available on Amazon. I wrote this book in teaching that lean entrepreneurship class because I really could not find a good book that explained lean and basic ideas for small business and for services. A lot of the lean books relate to manufacturing, and if you're a manufacturer, that's great. But if you're not, which most people are not, this is a really good book, and it gives you more background and digs even deeper into some of these techniques. Here's my email, my LinkedIn. So feel free to send me questions. I'm always happy to answer them. I am not a formal SCORE mentor, but what I would be happy to do is if anybody on this webinar is seriously interested in trying to adopt lean management and go further than what you've learned tonight, send me an email and we'll work out a way where I can help you with that. I'm happy to volunteer to help you through that. A couple of last minute thoughts and I'll turn it back over to Karina. If you think these small improvements are like, they're small, they're not worth it. Okay, you need to think again, because that's how Toyota did what they did. That's how Citi did what they did. That's how we had that great success at Trend. Little improvements really add up. It doesn't mean you don't do big things. You create new IT systems, that's fine. But this is something that without doing the big things, you can still get amazing success. You might also think like, this looks good, but it's too early. I'm busy. I'm trying to get my business started. Now is the time to do it. If you talk to Andrew or Keith, if you have an ongoing business and try to transform into this, it's very painful because you tend to end up building a lot of non-lean habits, and it's really hard to change later. Now is absolutely the best time to do it. It's actually relatively easy to do it now. These basic ideas of lean are very flexible. They can be a foundation, and they can help you regardless of the kind of business that you want to develop, build, or end up building. So do it now. Don't wait. Learn this now. And the last thing I want to say is, if you may buy into the continuous improvement and getting better every day, but you're a little leery about engaging employees and getting them too involved, getting them to think. I realize that can be uncomfortable, but it is critical. The good news is that lean gives you tools and techniques for doing it. It really shows you how to do it. So I'm not here to tell you it's easy, but I can tell you that if you are able to do it even a little bit, or do it really well, and combine that with the lean techniques of getting better every day, you're going to be unbeatable. So with that, thank you so much. Put on the thank you slide, I guess. And I guess I'll Karina, turn it back over to you. And
thank you. Some burning questions here. So let's go ahead before we wrap it up. Yes, with that, we just 2 questions here. Would you prefer to be lean and buy from your competition at a higher cost, or buy at a lower cost but need to buy a larger quantity to meet purchase requirements? And then, so I guess you can go ahead and answer those 2.
Yes, and I see the other one too. Yeah, very good questions. And we had to deal with that at Trend and wholesale. Do we buy truckloads and get purchase discounts, but oftentimes to buy a truckload was maybe 2 or 3 months worth of material. And there's no easy answer to it one way or the other. It depends how much of a discount you get. There are techniques for doing that. It's called EOQ, economic order quantity. I'm not going to get into that, but there are ways of doing that kind of mathematically. But even just on common sense, you just have to have a sense for how much space you have. But again, you want to do not automatically go for the quantity discount, and you say, well, I've got enough cash in the bank. Let me just go ahead and buy 6 months worth of this stuff because I'm getting a 5% or 10% discount. Don't automatically do it. We tend to be biased in that direction, and it's best not to, think it through a little more. Other questions, really good questions here as well. Who identifies the waste? The person doing the activity, the manager, or a higher level person? Likewise, the metrics. Okay, when you first start with this, the reality is you do start with the higher level people, the managers, because they're the ones that's really where this starts from. And this is how it's done at Toyota and at City Furniture and any lean organization I've seen, is that, you have to be practical about who is able to come up with ideas. So at first, you may very well have either supervisors or managers who are start to come up with ideas, but as you'll learn in future webinars, the idea is for the manager not to be the one that comes up with ideas. You have to then start to learn how to ask questions and teach and mentor your employees. Okay, that's where the relationship comes in. And again, it's not, it takes some time, but it's really worth it. So at first it's the manager. Over time, I always say you want to try to delegate as much as you can. And I don't even like the word delegate, but you try to get as much involvement and suggestions from frontline employees as you can, but only as much as they're prepared to, But it's a process. Over time, they get better and better at. So, great question. It's certainly not always the worker. It starts usually with the manager, and then hopefully you get the workers more involved as time goes on and everybody gets used to it.